Hi, this is Holly from the Sweet Simple Things, and welcome to my channel where we make healthy and nourishing recipes the whole family will love. Make sure you hit subscribe to see all the latest recipes. I'm really excited for this one. It's a 100% whole wheat sandwich bread made with fresh milled flour. Now, fresh milled flour can be a little bit tricky to deal with sometimes, especially if you're new to it, so I'll give you some tips as we go through this video. But this bread is soft and fluffy, and here I'm showing you the texture on the inside of the bread. This is a great recipe, and it's very easy too, especially if you're just starting out with fresh milled flour. So we're going to start by milling our grains. I'm using a hard white wheat. This is an organic hard white wheat from Azure Standard. I'm using a mock mill 200 here, but before I got my mock mill, I milled for almost a year with just the KitchenAid attachment. It's not that great, the KitchenAid attachment, but it got me by until I saved up the money to get my mock mill, and my mock mill is one of my favorite kitchen things I've ever bought next to my KitchenAid mixer. So anyway, you're going to mill a fine whole wheat flour from your hard white berries. Now you can use hard red as well. Hard white will give kind of a lighter mouthfeel and just that lighter look that if you're trying to feed this bread to some people that maybe don't appreciate the density of whole grains, hard white is a good starter grain. I love whole grains, but because I'm feeding kids a lot and they sometimes get a little suspicious when I get a little too crazy in the kitchen, I use a lot of hard white in the stuff that I bake for my family. When that's done, take your fresh milled flour and add it to your stand mixer bowl. So we'll get this in our KitchenAid and add our water to it. And then I'll put the paddle on and just mix it all together until all the water is absorbed into the flour. And then we're gonna let this sit for about 45 minutes before we start to knead. This is an important trick with fresh milled flour. If you add the water and your ingredients and you just think that you can just start kneading it right away, right when you mix it, you're going to be kneading for a really long time. Fresh milled flour just needs that time to absorb the liquid, and you're going to look at it and you're going to say, hey, all the liquid is absorbed. I don't see a puddle of water at the bottom of this bowl or anything, but just trust me, it needs time to actually fully hydrate the flour. So we're just mix it until there are no dry bits left in the bowl, and then I'm just gonna cover it and let it sit for 45 minutes. You can, the minimum I would do is 30, but you can go up to an hour. Some people go a little longer, but I don't think that's really necessary. I think 45 to 60 minutes is perfect. Okay, it's been about 45 minutes, so I'm gonna uncover it, and now I'm going to add the rest of my ingredients. I'll add 1 egg right into the bowl, followed by a little bit of olive oil, some honey, a little bit of lemon juice. Now this is a trick that kind of helps your bread not be too crumbly. And then some salt. And finally, we'll sprinkle 2 1/4 teaspoon quick rise yeast on top of the dough. That's the equivalent of 1 packet. Then I'll use my stand mixer to mix this all up. So make sure you start it on the lowest speed at first. It can be a little messy as you start to mix it together, and the dough can be, kind of sticky and hard to mix into at first, but it will come together. So just keep it at that low speed at first. Once it's starting to come together much nicer, then you can increase the speed a click or two on the mixer. Once it's mostly mixed together, you can go ahead and just stop, and then we're going to remove the mixing paddle and put on the dough hook. And now we're going to begin the process of kneading. Now, one thing, if you're new to making bread with fresh milled flour, you might be surprised at how long you have to knead. I need so much longer now than I did with bagged flour, and it's just, I don't totally know why fresh milled flour needs longer, but it just does. And so once you learn that, though, it's very easy to work with. I think when people have a hard time with fresh milled flour, it's often because they're just expecting it to act exactly like bagged flour does. So they follow the same process that they usually do with the bagged flour, and then they find that it doesn't turn out that great in the end. But once you know what to look for to know that the dough is ready, those things are going to be the same whether it's fresh milled flour or not. So how I know I'm done kneading my dough is when my dough passes what's called the window pane test. And I'm going to show you that in a little bit here. Your dough, as you probably saw with my video, once you start mixing with the dough hook, it might take a little bit to come together in a ball like that. And that's okay. Just give it time. It will come together in a ball. You can stop and kind of fold the dough in a few times to help speed that along if you want, but it'll come together. And then let it go for a while. Like I said, my average time for kneading is 15 minutes. So give it about 15 minutes, and then you're going to do the window pane test, and that'll be coming up in a moment here. So to do the window pane test, you're just going to take your hands, grab a small piece of the dough, stretch it out, and very lightly try to stretch the dough so that it's very translucent and thin. Now, my dough failed the test there. It failed the window pane test because as I tried to gently stretch the dough, it just would rip. That tells me the dough is not yet done kneading. So I turn my mixer back on. I think I'm using speed 4 on the KitchenAid as I do this, and I just let it go for a few more minutes, and then we try again. Now here you can see it's looking much better. It's still a little bit fragile, so I'm going to go a little bit longer, but it's much better than it was the first time we did the window pane test. So I'm going to keep kneading. Okay, now this time, you can see this is much better. This is pretty good. I got a little bit of a rip there, but I was really trying to go pretty thin. I would say this is good to go. We're going to stop our kneading and be all done. And we're going to let this dough rise until it is doubled. That can take about 1.5 hours to 2 hours. Okay, at this time my dough has doubled, so I'm going to scoop it out onto my counter and shape it and put it into my loaf pan. Now, I highly recommend layering your loaf pan with a little bit of parchment paper. You don't have to cover the entire pan because the corners can be kind of annoying when you do that, but just take a small enough strip to cover that main part of the pan. It's easy enough to run a knife along the sides after you bake. So I spread mine out into a rectangle like you see here, and then I start by kind of doing a trifold. I use my bench scraper to help me do one half in toward the middle, the other end in toward the middle, and then I'm going to rotate the dough so that the short end is facing me, and I'm going to roll it up kind of like a burrito. This is how I like to do it. There are other ways of shaping sandwich loaves. You can shape it any way you want. It doesn't really matter, but this is how I do it. I like to pinch the ends when I'm done, and then I use my bench scraper to help me get it into the pan. Go ahead and cover it with a damp tea towel and let it rise until it's poofy, probably about another hour, hour and a half. So there it is, ready to go in the oven. I've heated up my oven to 350, and we are going to bake this for 40 minutes or until the internal temperature of the dough is at least 190. And that is a cool trick too. If you've never actually checked the internal temperature of your bread before when baking, and you've ever struggled with like a dense gummy loaf, I highly recommend you try it, because if you hit at least 190 degrees for these sandwich breads, gumminess shouldn't be an issue. That said, unless sometimes gumminess happens if you cut the loaf while it's too warm. So you do have to watch for that as well. But anyway, I'm checking my temperature and making sure I'm going to pass at least 190, and I do, so I know my loaf is done. You can take a stick of butter and just run a little bit of butter on top of the crust. This will just help keep it nice and soft. This is optional. You can skip it if you want, but it's honestly such a small amount of butter. It's like a half a teaspoon or less that it ends up being. It really doesn't take much at all. Let it cool in the pan about 10 minutes before you try to remove it. Then I just use a butter knife to just loosen the edges on those short ends where I don't have the parchment paper. That just allows me to pull it out easier. And there you go. We have our nice, beautiful loaf that you can allow to fully cool on the cooling rack. I recommend letting it cool all the way before slicing, again, just to prevent that gumminess issue. But, you know, I get it. What's better than warm bread? So if you don't care about that, go ahead and eat yourself a warm slice. There's nothing better than a warm slice of fresh bread.